right, we are in Mombasa, but the mood here is quite spectacle because everybody doesn't know what to expect now that we are even taxing bread. So everybody is asking the question, the taxes, how are we going to manage? The payee is going to go up. So many other things. It appears that this budget will be driven by taxes and levies. Comparing it to 2023, I have a lead budget coordinator for the Coast Region, Madam Josephine Nyamai, who's going to just break it down to us since last year until now. Going the tax way, is it the right way? Did we perform well last year? That's why we are increasing this year. Or what do we do next? Karibu sana, Madam Josephine. Just give us an overview of what happened last year, and do you think that this year, if we go the tax way, we are still helping the Mwananchi instead of investing in productivity of the Mwananchi?
Thank you, June. So let me begin by saying that when you see a budget, there is, of course, if you look at the overall budget, this is what was presented before the National Assembly, which was an overall budget size of around 3.9 trillion shillings. So when you see that figure, then in your mind you want to ask yourself, okay, where is that money going to come from? And basically, if you look at the revenue that the government is going to raise in this financial year is around 2.9 trillion Kenyan shillings from what we call the ordinary revenue.
That's right.
So if you look at the expenditure and what we are going to raise, of course, from what we call the ministerial appropriations in aid, you find there's a deficit, a very big deficit of around 703. That is according to the figures that are presented in the BPS, so to speak, because the revenue and the estimate summary has not yet been made public. So looking at that, then you want to ask yourself, so how do we get there? Because when you compare the budget, the overall size of the budget in the financial year 2023-2024 was roughly coming to around 3.8, so to speak. So already you're seeing an increase already of around 3%. From 2023 to 2024. And what does that mean? That means the government has to make sure that they have, increase their revenues. Yeah? How do you increase the revenue? If you look at what we are collecting, for instance, in 2022, 2023, because we already have like the actual figures, you can see the actual collections was around 1.9 trillion, roughly 2 trillion. And then now in the financial year 2022-2023, the increment went to around 2.5. And now we are talking about 2.9.
Yes.
So what does that mean? Now that means more taxes for the citizens. And then you also want to ask yourself, where is that deficit coming from? So for the government, because they're already spending more than they are producing, or rather than they are collecting, then that means the budget deficit is going up. And this year we are looking at a budget deficit of around 703. How do we get to bridge the gap of the budget deficit? That is basically through borrowing externally and also internally. If you look at what the government proposes to borrow internally is more compared to what is being borrowed. And what does that mean to MSMEs, small businesses, young people who are running businesses? Of course, it means when the government is borrowing, there is already crowding out of the micro and small enterprises, which the government at the same time is trying to support. So which to me is a bit retrogressive. But again, that is not the problem. The problem of setting the taxes from ordinary revenue collection to around 2.9 trillion, according to the figures that we have in the BPS. To me, if you look at the past, the government has constantly missed on the revenue targets. And what does that mean? If you miss on the revenue targets, then that already widens the budget deficit gap. Then the government will go the borrowing way. We're already talking about the increased and the inflated debt situation in our country. Where did we come from? Why is it that we are seeing a bloated wage bill and debt? If you look at historical presentation from 2014-15, every year the government must have a deficit of the figures that were set initially in the budget policy statement, and also what we have at the end of the year. Yeah, and that has widened the budget deficit by far, and that means the government has to borrow. Remember, the government is undertaking what they are calling the fiscal consolidation program, which is really a good thing if only the government spends according to what is already allocated within the year. But what have we been seeing? That is not the case, because inside the year we have seen supplementary budget. We recently supplementary budget 2 for 2022-2023-2024 financial year was passed. What does that mean? That means shifting revenues, shifting the targets, and at the end of the day, what it does, it is increasing the deficit first, and the deficit has to be met by borrowing. When we borrow, we are already increasing our debt situation. Looking at what the government will spend in the proposed, or rather the incoming financial year, the government is going to spend around 1.8 trillion towards public debt obligations, on servicing and also on interest. So what does that tell you? Already we are spending 70 shillings of what we collect on revenue to pay debt. What does that tell you? Only 30 shillings remain for services delivery. And that is why we are saying we do not have problem with the government, but can they really work on the consolidation? Can they really work on cutting expenditure? So that if they don't get that amount of money, they will not go the debt way. And also, again, they are not going to squeeze the common citizen in order to raise that money. And that is why you've been hearing the uproar in the finance bill.
So according to you, the government, my colleague also Victor has asked, is the government missing the target every time?
Yes, the government is missing the targets annually. The set targets. For instance, if you look at the financial deficit in 2014-2015 financial year, the deficit that was proposed was around 367 billion. The government missed that by almost 99%. In 2015, they are again missed by that 7%. From the deficit that was there from 533 billion Kenyan shillings, it ended up being 732. Acha nikulete hapa karibu, at least in 2020. In 2020, we saw the deficit being set at 614 billion Kenyan shillings. But by the time we are finishing the year, the deficit had grown to around 965, close to a trillion, which is almost a percentage of 57% increase. Recently, in 2023-2024, the deficit was around 720. And at the end of the year, it has expanded to around 785, representing 9%. So what are we saying? We have no problem with the targets that are being set. But we have problem when those targets are not met. If you look at the collection, the revenue collection trend by the government already knows we can only come up to this far. But if you look at the justification that are being given as to why we are setting the ceiling so high, is because they are saying we are doing fiscal consolidation, whereby government wants to increase revenue collection, ordinary revenue collection in the medium term, that is between now and 2027, to around 20% of the GDP. Currently, where we state actually right now, when you look at the actual ordinary revenue to GDP, it was around 14.3%. So you can see already there, you can see the gap. So what we are saying is that the government has been setting too high targets, which at the same time they are unable to meet. And with those stringent taxation measures, I think it is just too much for them to be able to meet.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I'm sure you've gone through each and every proposals. Now, there are some that have been not filing my returns. Instead of paying the penalty of 2,000 shillings, I believe now we'll be paying, I think, 20,000 shillings. this is not it only. We have the digital marketplace, which they have, of course, extended the areas of operation, the areas of taxing.
Yeah.
We also have the mortgage loans that people are borrowing. Of course, it has increased. The payee, of course, is going to shoot from 36,000 per annum to 48,000 per annum. There are so many aspects that have been introduced that, of course, will resonate or will translate to the paycheck of a public servant. For companies, probably it has increased. I was just looking at it from 5 million shillings to 8 million
For
shillings
turnover,
in
yeah.
value.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are so many things that have been increased to choke, I would say, in my opinion, to choke the business fraternity. Even if the government has really focused on the outside world, those who are investing in and those who are taking money into Kenya or exporting things, even if they have to some extent broadened their tax, however, the common mwananchi's productivity, I believe, is essential. So if you come up with higher taxes, how is the common mwananchi supposed to reach the 2 trillion target if already he's choking? And just give us some of the areas you've seen that are really probably unfair as people raise their concerns out in the streets.
Great, thank you, June. So I think there are many with us as citizens, and that is why we are asking, okay, we are being taxed, but can we see the value of the money that we get taxed from? So if you look at some of the proposals, of course, there has been a lot of diverse discussion on the motor vehicle tax of around 2.5%. That has to be paid. That was zero rated. We have seen also the VAT going up, and especially on bread, which has been, I would say, the darling of many households in the country. Yeah. We also see introduction of what you call levy tax, yes, which is being paid by local manufacturers. But at the same time, you want to ask yourself, the government are going to harm those the interventions that they make, which for me is a bit retrogressive. Yeah. We are also seeing, the digital tax. We are also seeing the economic tax presence being introduced. So there are several proposals which will not really hold well. Even in the transaction, the excise duty, it's a lot.
I also saw that they are introducing the Data Protection Act as we wind up, so that they can access your accounts, so that they know you can't evade these people. They will be everywhere and looking for you to ensure that the money is returned to the government.
Well, we have Data Protection Act of 2019, and I don't think the government would want to interfere with the privacy of the citizens by getting or accessing the third-party data just to ensure compliance. I believe there are so many ways that the government can be able, but even as they come for the citizens, for me it is basically, can we see the value of the money? Can we see the value of the many taxes that we are being taxed? And finally, can the government just live within its means, so that we don't end up having a very huge deficit? We have a high debt burden, and we still have our shilling struggling. I think a lot can be done by living within our means as a government. And also the government ensuring that we can see the value of the taxes that have been. I don't think Kenyans have problem paying taxes, but Kenyans have problem paying taxes and not seeing what those taxes are doing. Paying taxes, and I will still go and pay for medical cover, paying taxes, and I still go and pay for school fees. So basically we are saying the government has to ensure that we see value for the money that is being taxed. Thomas.
Thank you so much. I wish I had like an hour for us to break down the whole thing, but we have to cross over. Thank you so much. That was Josephine Nyamai. She's the lead budget coordinator for the Coast region.
Budget Hub.
Budget Hub here. If you're looking for an expert, an economic one, as you have seen, she's very brilliant. Do get in contact with them. Today's budget day is going to be a mouthful day, and wherever you are, don't hesitate to give us your feedback on the expectations today.